What happens once this bill gets passed, Paul? What exactly is going to transpire from this?
As our friend Gareth Soloway would say, there's blood in the street, and that's when you buy. Things are going to go crazy. It's going to get kind of interesting.
We have a special guest today. Paul Barron, CEO and host of the Paul Barron Network, joins us. We're going to be talking about the latest tech news, NVIDIA, AI, and what the ETH Futures ETF means for the crypto markets. Welcome to the show. Paul, good to host you today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Let's talk first about NVIDIA and AI. And I want to learn a little bit about yourself. We'll talk about the Paul Barron Network in just a bit, because I wanted the audience to be familiar with your work as well. You run a big YouTube channel covering all sorts of tech news, all sorts of crypto news. We'll put a link to the Paul Barron Network down in the description down below. NVIDIA beat earnings again this week. Stock spiked to new highs. Now, Paul, let's talk about the technology behind NVIDIA's products. The chips that are demanded by basically every company that needs this tech for their AI developments. Is this a fad right now, or is there actually substance behind this hype? What do you think?
I think, when you look at NVIDIA and in general, just the technology that has been really kind of pushing into the current status of AI's boom. We won't necessarily call it a bubble just yet, but I think what they've been able to do is, of course, take advantage of that. Obviously, their technology, when you look at GPU and processing power, the requirements that are going to be needed by both AI, but also there's going to be other industries out there that kind of flow into this. For them to hit an all-time high on their stock, it regressed a little bit almost quickly after it bumped off the top there once the earnings came in. I still I'm still bullish on NVIDIA, but I'm less bullish long-term for it to be some sort of, hockey stick type of movement. Now, granted, if something big happens in AI, like real breakthroughs, then the idea of compute power is going to be very, very critical. And obviously, NVIDIA would be the number one company that would pay dividends on that.
Yeah. So I'm just reading an article that reported on this. There's all sorts of press on this release. The earnings report was an absolute monster, said the Financial Times. The results were miles ahead of expectations, and the outlook was too. The company expects $16 billion in revenues in the third quarter. In the year ago period, revenue was only $5.9 billion. Who do you think are the largest sort of demanders or users of these chips? Which industries do you see being their biggest customers going forward?
Right now, I mean, it's hands down, it's going to be any company that is implementing projects in the AI space. With the amount of agents that have been launched just in the last 6 months, when you look at OpenAI and their advancements so far, whether you like it, you don't like it, the reality is that almost every company on the planet within the next 5 years will have some sort of implementation around that. They're going to need compute power. So NVIDIA, I'm more interested to see how some of the rest of the market might respond. And that could be a variety of companies. We're tracking Unity pretty heavily, obviously, for the crypto space. We think they're going to be a lot more involved in everything from gaming. But I think gaming will also be a big factor of a lot of these chip makers, but which will, of course, go into these processors that I think are really kind of the future of the internet as a whole, for sure.
Do you see this playing into the Web3 space that I know you cover a lot? Does that space require additional computing power in chips from not just NVIDIA, but other chip makers as well?
Yeah, well, it depends. If you look at some of the miners, we just had Hut 8 on our show this week, and Hut 8 is one of those miners that is in the middle of a merger right now. Some of these miners have started to diversify their efforts, and mainly because of what is happening within Bitcoin. When you think about, what Bitcoin is, which is a limited mining capacity over the next however many, decades. The idea, though, is to how do you play against that, or at least have some sort of, alternative track. They've done a lot in the idea of gaming. We'll probably see some movement in Web3, especially when you look at rendering, et cetera, that are going to play into, I think, the future of Web3, which will be a big part of that. We follow a token called Render that is involved in that, which is decentralized rendering for compute power, which will be, I think, a big part of how technology is going to advance in the future for sure.
Have you on your show discussed the future of automobiles and how that industry may collaborate with companies like NVIDIA?
It's funny. When we first launched TechPath, the goal for our network at the time was to cover robotics, AI, electric vehicles, and blockchain. And we did a lot of electric in our early years, really kind of covering. I'm a big EV fan, so I've had many Teslas and have analyzed Elon from left to right. And when you look at just what he's done with Dojo, which is basically their neural net of being able to analyze all this data coming in from the cars, there's going to be a certain level of requirement there. Now, I don't know how many car makers will really advance to that level of, compute power. You look at Ford. I just saw their CEO out on a road trip, and he realized their biggest problem was their charging network. But the bigger issue is, do they ever get to the level of autonomy that the Teslas have? I have tested this in and out with various Teslas that I've owned and have had access to, against some of the best self-driving technology, I think, which is around BMW. BMW, of course, doesn't hold a candle to what Tesla has been able to do so far. So when you look at the chip capacities that are going to be needed by something like Dojo, which is, Tesla's neural net system, their supercomputer, I don't know if there's enough demand there. I think it will all come from AI.
Well, there's been criticism that even Tesla's supposedly full self-driving capabilities aren't in reality what they've marketed to be.
It sucks.
So the other car companies are even worse.
They suck worse. Yeah, they suck worse. Now, Tesla's about as close as you're going to get right now to FSD, and that's just on highway driving. Once you get past phantom braking and all those kind of issues.
We're going to pivot to cryptos in just a minute, but just ending on Tesla, since we're talking about Tesla, another stock that you cover, and a lot of people do follow this. So they've recorded record profits this year. They've had a very good year. Now, the future of the company, is it going to be exclusively from their car division as well, or do you see them branching out to other areas as a higher percentage of revenues?
Yeah, I definitely see Tesla as a software company. Cars are kind of a secondary thought. I think it all depends on the strategy. I mean, the Model Y sales have just been over the moon. But you look at the potential of what that company can do, whether it is in electrification. I think the bigger factor for Tesla will probably boil down to their charging network, because you've got so many companies now, other car makers, trying to leverage into electric. Whether you think about, especially in the luxury lines, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, et cetera, have all moved in that direction. But the challenge is they have no place to charge these cars. And Tesla just recently opened it up, but it's only a handful of charging stations, I think less than 10 right now. If they were able to get their network open and accelerate their charging network, I think that wins the day for them in the car maker side of things. But more than likely, it's probably going to be all kinds of services that end up maybe even supplying to other car makers down the road.
Are there any companies that you're eyeing that are in the EV charging space exclusively that have huge potential? Certainly, this is a space that's going to blow up. It's just a matter of who's going to build these charging stations.
I think Electrify America, you think they are probably the closest front runner right now. There's a handful of other ones out there, but they're so small, they're not really going to make, I think, a dent. Electrify America, though, does have some major problems in terms of their charging network, which is really just availability and repair. Even though they are getting into, some high-speed charging, which is what a lot of these new, especially these new exotics need, and even hybrids to a certain extent. You need the capacity to be able to handle the kilowatt hour output, which is the biggest problem that all these charging networks have. Superchargers, of course, with Tesla kill it.
Right. Yeah. Well, Tesla now has agreements with some other companies to use their superchargers, so that space is interesting as well. Well, Tesla, let's segue into Bitcoin now and cryptos. Tesla dumped 75% of their Bitcoin holdings last year. SpaceX recently, just a few weeks ago, dumped all of their Bitcoin holdings. Why is this trend happening amongst specifically Elon Musk's companies?
It's a very interesting thing that we've been analyzing. I think if you look at Bitcoin in general, there's two camps. You have the Bitcoiners who are just, rabid to an extent that Bitcoin is the only, crypto project out there. And then you have kind of this alternative ecosystem that mostly rides on Ethereum. And then there's a handful of others, including Doge, et cetera. But the point is that maybe Elon is looking at the system as a whole. And if you look at just the requirement in terms of transaction speed, you look at the transaction, I know everybody will come at me with, hey, what about the Lightning Network? Well, if you look at the Lightning Network and really analyze it, there's a lot of breakdowns in how Lightning will work. So I'm still very skeptical as to whether Bitcoin can be used. Hence, if you look at real thought leaders out there in the space, they may be looking at other alternatives. And then maybe that's what Elon is looking at right now.
I think some companies were looking at holding Bitcoin as a US dollar replacement on their
Hedge.
treasury account in their is that something that you still think has potential?
No.
No.
Is
that because of its volatility
it's a speculated asset on speculators who speculate the assets. So it's not, I don't look at it. It is what it is. It's a speculated asset, So even if we get an ETF approval with BlackRock or others, I think this is still going to be a speculation play, and it's not necessarily an alternative for anything outside the U.S. dollar. I don't think Bitcoin competes with the U.S. dollar at all.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about the ETFs now. The ETH Futures ETF, not a spot ETF, but the Futures ETF was recently approved. Now you've got companies like ARK jumping on the bandwagon to create an ETF ASAP. People are looking at this as a positive sign that the spot Bitcoin ETF approval is coming soon. We've been waiting for it for a while. Paul, do you have any news, insights as to when it's coming, if it's coming?
Listen, we've had Eric Balchunas, Jeff Seyffert, the Bloomberg analyst on our show. He and both those guys are pretty well plugged into the ETF sector. I look to them a lot for just insights. Both of them are kind of pressuring that we might get an approval for BlackRock. And because it is BlackRock, and we've had Darius Dale on for 42 Macro just on last week, he and I got into this very topic. And he even kind of alluded to the point, hey, this is just a matter of when, not if. So I think right now it's a timing issue. A lot of this is still playing in the political sphere of what Gensler is doing at the SEC. So I think there are so many interesting things happening right now. If you follow us on our show, we break a lot of the regulatory alignment down, what Cathie Wood is doing. And I think what ARK is doing around just the idea of an ETH ETF futures is pretty huge, because her strategy is very, very intricate around some of the investments that she's made. And this plays all the way into sports betting with what's happening with Penn and ESPN Bet. So there's a lot happening right now in the space for sure.
Explain to me, why is it harder, or does it take longer to approve a spot ETF than a futures one?
That one I cannot answer. I wish I could understand that. Yeah. I think if you answered that question, you probably have maybe a fly on the wall in the SEC as to why exactly that is happening.
What changes do you think are happening currently in the regulatory landscape following the landmark digital assets bill that they're looking at? What's next?
Well, I think the biggest issue right now is Patrick McHenry and Maxine Waters. They almost in public during the last hearings. It was very interesting too, because if you watch the body language, there appeared to be somewhat of an alignment between McHenry and Waters on the future of not only the stablecoin bill, but also just in general, the crypto bills. But more importantly, I think the stablecoin bill. And then, of course, the White House, the administration came in and pretty much put a nix on it from at least the Dem side. And it kind of played out on the open floor of the House in live real time. And I think there are some very interesting things happening right now in DC. The likelihood of a stablecoin bill, I still feel very confident that is going to be one of the catalysts that will move the markets, at least for the risk asset side, for crypto in general, will move the markets forward, because that's going to open up a lot of opportunity for both companies to hold USDC or maybe something else like PayPal, their new stablecoin. So, and I don't know if you heard the news on Coinbase just put it in their roadmap that they're going to list PYUSD, which is PayPal stablecoin. Very interesting.
Wait a minute, this PayPal stablecoin launched before this stablecoin bill has been passed. So why was that allowed to happen?
Well, interesting that you asked that question, David, because everybody's wanting to know that too. What does PayPal know? They're one of the largest financial companies in the world. They also have front run the banking system. to where we may see something in the idea of the streets of Washington, especially through the lobbying groups that are supporting the stablecoin bills. It's very possible PayPal may be realizing that we're going to get something positive on the side of a stablecoin regulation. And if we do, I think that's a very good sign for crypto in general. It does legitimize the sector.
What happens once this bill gets passed, Paul? What exactly is going to transpire from this?
As our friend Gareth Soloway would say, there's blood in the street, and that's when you buy. Things are going to go crazy. It's going to get kind of interesting. I think a lot of the markets will start to move. We'll probably see Bitcoin and Ethereum both react favorably. Whether that holds, I think a lot is still dependent on the macro conditions here in the United States. Obviously, with the Fed's decision or discussion today that we're going to have inflation a lot longer than what has been anticipated, I think is still a problem.
But more specifically, in regards to stablecoins, are we going to see an eruption of new stablecoins, Paul, you think? Or you think we're going to get more companies, payment providers like PayPal making their own stablecoins? Yeah, what's going to happen?
No, that's a good question. You will have, I think, a lot more companies coming into the fray in terms of a stablecoin option, maybe even to the level of retailers, someone like an Amazon or even a Walmart that probably could jump into the play. Because with this, it starts to, you just think about instantaneous transaction settlement and what it does and offers. We struggle right now. I run a media company that has multiple lines of different media outlets that we do in different industries outside the finance, crypto, tech space. And one of the biggest problems we have is either paying vendors or getting paid, by clients. And most of it is ACH, which probably is that most of that, at best, you're at a 24-hour settlement. Sure, there's instantaneous, supposedly same day available when you pay that fee. But I think all of that starts to change when we have a stable coin that can be transacted and truly benchmarked against the US dollar. This is not a competition to the US dollar. I think it only supports it.
Could it be competition to Bitcoin, though? I ask this because I spoke to Coin Payments a while ago, and on their platform, it used to be 80% of the transactions done on their platform was with Bitcoin. And now that ratio has fallen to something like 20%, which means that of all the transactions between merchants B2B using Coin Payments, 20% is now Bitcoin, and the rest is predominantly stablecoins. So I wonder if the eruption of stablecoins could mean a lower amount of Bitcoins used in transactions, certainly in circulation. What do you think?
Bitcoin is not a store of value. So, if you're talking, it's too volatile to be used as a store of value for transactions. You're going to flip to a stablecoin. Bitcoin is there for what it should be, and that is speculating on the asset, hoping that it's going to go up based on whether we see adoption primarily. Use cases, I really thought that Lightning would be the answer to Bitcoin, but I have not been convinced, that Lightning has been able to solve a lot. I know that, obviously there's been these small tests down in El Salvador, but I don't think Lightning is going to be the long-term opportunity. There's just too many problems already with Lightning. I just felt like, and I know they promise, hey, that's going to be in the next release. I get it, but at some point, you can only call wolf so many times.
Paul, I'm guessing based on what you're saying that you're not a Bitcoin maxi.
I'm not a Bitcoin maxi, but I buy Bitcoin and I invest in it. I hold it. I trade in and out of it just like any other speculated asset. I don't necessarily consider myself a crypto maxi. I look at all these projects for what they are, and that is there's opportunity, just like any stock. And I'll take advantage of the one that's moving the fastest. And I have no affinity to one that's better or worse than the other.
One of the arguments from Bitcoin maxis is that the Bitcoin is a superior form of money to gold, to the US dollar even, and will one day probably serve as a global reserve currency. This is one theory that I've heard.
That's a big theory. That's a huge theory. I get hit by the maxis all the time on this. I won't call them maxis, I'll just call them Bitcoiners. They, people that truly believe in this technology. And listen, I like the technology. Do I think that it's going to be an alternative as a reserve? I don't think so. I think Bitcoin will always maintain itself It just unless it changes, which is like you're saying a four-letter word, if that were the case for a Bitcoiner. But I just don't see that as being the future. Once you dive into it, you can read the white paper, start to dive into it. I would recommend all your viewers really to go in and listen and watch to some of the latest technology releases on the Lightning Network, because that would really be the only layer 2 solution that's even close to being able to have any sort of transactional opportunity for Bitcoin to do exactly what you were saying, which is become a payment network. I just don't see that as a real opportunity. Have I used it to pay with things? Sure. But that's just like you and I agreeing. We could have said, let's do it in red roses, but it's still, whatever you think it's worth versus what I think it's worth.
What is the ideal crypto or blockchain technology specifically for payments, B2B or B2C or C2C? Is it a stable coin? Is it something else? What do you think?
Well, for payments, then I think you're going to have to be writing somewhere in the Ethereum network, probably on a layer 2, or possibly in some format in the Solana blockchain. Solana, obviously, the fastest by far. The question is whether or not they completely come out of beta. Uptime is going to be critical for them, but they're doing a lot of things right that I think, and we're talking about all this technology right now. Here it is, 2023. I think this is advancing much faster now. Remember, it's kind of slow. It's slow until it isn't, and it moves very quickly. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My background is in computer science. I spent a lot of time working with Microsoft, and we watched the birth of the internet. And at the time, my boss, Bill Gates, said the internet was a fad. We heard it. We understood it. That was our mission at Microsoft. We continued on our merry way. We were wrong. And a lot of companies outflanked us. Of course, the rest of the story is known. But the point is, I think that's where we are in the blockchain era right now. AI could be argued that we're in some similar positions as well in terms of time.
Some people have also agreed with you that Ethereum could be the building block for future payment rails. Are you surprised that ETH hasn't flipped Bitcoin yet? I've heard this for a number of years, that it would be flipping Bitcoin at some point. It hasn't happened yet. Will it happen?
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin's largest market cap out there still by far. It has the largest impact. Remember the first block, I think it was 2009 for Bitcoin, 2015 for ETH. It just doesn't have the lineage that Bitcoin has just yet. And you don't have BlackRock yet filing a Bitcoin ETF spot. I think that you will have some of these majors file Ethereum spots as soon as we get through the Bitcoin spot approvals. It's coming. It's coming.
What happens if it doesn't come? What happens to the market if it gets rejected?
I think it's just a matter of time. It's going to be more of a political play at that point. Most of that is going to be obviously Gensler holding back most of the market innovation. I think we'll continue to see a lot of lobby throughput in DC. I just don't anticipate that it's not going to get approved under certain conditions that I think BlackRock and the SEC will come to terms with. So, and then that will start the ball forward, because at that point, then we'll start to see the movement, the potential, and the legitimization of that market to become a new potential asset class that will start to come off the floor. I mean, we're talking a very small, market cap here of crypto, a little over $1 trillion. Even its best was at 2.6 trillion. So, versus gold, which is over 12 trillion now, it needs that. And then you look at securities, real estate, et cetera. I mean, there's an opportunity here, I think, for crypto in general to become a major asset class for sure.
What are your views on how the market will react post-Bitcoin halving next year? People who are bullish on Bitcoin cite this as a reason to buy ahead of the halving cycle because it's historically done well after halving. But as our friend Gareth Soloway would say, this just seems too easy. So maybe be cautious about that strategy. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things I look at, the halving, I listen, because I'm a compute guy. So anytime you run into a scenario that compute is required to achieve something and it becomes more complex, that's going to create value. And whether you think about it utility-wise, there is value there. So that in itself, just by the bare minimum of definition, should cause the Bitcoin price to go up. The other factor that plays into this, again, is in the last bull run and the one before that. And I know people say, well, we're going to have adoption, we're going to have institutional capital flood into the space, et cetera. We never had a BlackRock. We never had the House basically put a crypto legislation on the floor to go through to vote here coming up in less than 30 days. That never has been done before. Those are the driving factors, I think. ETF regulation, those are the two things that legitimize this space. And at that point, I think Bitcoin just becomes like any other speculated asset. Yes, it will have complexity issues with the halvening that will drive value, but will it see the kind of growth that maybe the rest of the market gets to? That's the big question.
What's the sentiment of the people that have come on your show, Paul, in regards to cryptos and Bitcoin? Are we still in a bear market, or are we about to see spring finally?
It's interesting because we get a chance we don't call that too often. We ask the experts. So of all the experts, I would say, Gareth has been on our show, Gareth Soloway. Gareth is a little bit still on the more, I'll say, bearish slant in short term. He still likes it long term. If you look at Ran over for Crypto Banter, shout out to those guys. Ran is very bullish. He's on the side that he thinks the market's moving up. But you look at Darius, some of the guys from Bloomberg, I would say right now it's about 60-40 still on the bear side, 40% on the bull side, 60% on the bear side. So I'm siding slightly on short-term bear. We got to get through this inflation issue for sure. But I think we also got regulation and ETF issues to deal with.
I think when the Fed pivots, we'll see more clarity on the bullish side, but that's my personal view.
Well, that's going to be next year, David.
Yeah.
You're talking about maybe mid 2024. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And you've got a halving. Yeah, you've got a halving happening before then, possibly an ETF coming in hopefully before then, and maybe even a sign of a new president, as well. So there could be a lot of things facing us.
They could. Yeah, that's another issue we haven't discussed yet, but they could hold the rates for longer. Just this morning, after Powell's speech at Jackson Hole, the probability of another hike by the end of the year spiked up to 40-something%, which is on even with a probability of no hike. So we could potentially see another hike by the end of the year. We'll see. Paul, I want to learn a bit more about yourself. Now, you worked in tech, and now you're doing a lot of different things in media. Tech Path is one of your biggest channels. How did you transition from working as an engineer to what you're doing now?
Well, when I started in tech, my goal was mainly to help Microsoft kind of bridge the gap for their operating system to go into retail point of sale, which was just retail systems in general. That was my goal and my job. And I kind of fell into media as an accident about almost 20 years ago. And it was in the early days of media. We launched our first podcast in 2007. So probably one of the oldest B2B podcasts that's been out there in the space of different industries, mostly retail. And, I just fell in love with media and have kind of built several media companies, sold a few. And then we launched PBN, which is part of Rever Networks, which is our blockchain consulting business. And we do a lot there, but primarily we look at media as kind of being the next generation. I have believed that we are going to see a revolution. I mean, you're living proof of this. We're going to see a revolution in the voices on whether it's finance, news, politics, comedy, you name it, social aspects. We are going to see a shift, I think, away from what we've seen over the past 20 years in traditional media, coming to what we're doing right now, just like this right here.
I think I know what you mean, but for those of us watching who need clarification, what exactly are you referring to? What kind of shift is this? What have we been seeing in the last 20 years that may or may not still be around the next 20 years?
I think this is the last time that mainstream media will affect a presidency. I think we will be dealing with a completely different media landscape in 4 years that will completely move, because we've already seen this. I don't know if whether you are liberal, whether you're left or you're conservative, each one of those areas, let's just take the Young Turks. We'll call that kind of somewhat left liberal. But what Cenk Uygur has done with the Young Turks is, amazing. If you look at, what Ben Shapiro has done with the Daily Wire, you look at Patrick Bet-David, what he's done with his camp, and then you look at all of the winners that are these solos, which obviously is led by Joe Rogan. I think all of that is shifting, and we're going to most likely see that in finance news. I believe that's going to be the case. Your show, my show, will be competing with Squawk Box, CNBC, some of the best in the industry, mainly because people are willing to go out on a limb and get real news that are researched and really kind of dove into with a different analysis and no agenda. And I think that's the biggest issue for sure.
Wouldn't we all become mainstream then, technically, in 2 decades?
I don't know if it'll be the new mainstream. I think it's going to be, kind of the rebel mainstream. But
yeah, I don't know if we should use the word decentralized, but maybe it could apply to media.
Yeah,
who knows?
It is. I believe in that for sure. Decentralized media is a big part of that. We just switched over from a web destination to a destination for us in terms of gathering information, which is on Substack. And mainly that's because of its social behavior of how Substack is used. But when you look at, just the idea of RSS segregation and how integration is done within podcasts, all sorts of things. You've got podcasting 2.0, which is coming, which will most likely see a payment direct to creators. There's so many projects out there in the crypto space that are trying to solve this as well, which blockchain, I think, will be the winner on solving those kinds of direct-to-creator payments, possibly streaming rewards, things like that are already starting to play out in this space. So there is so much technology, and I will tell you this, the existing media companies out there, they might as well be Ford when against a Tesla. It just isn't the same. The kind of companies that are going to come out of this are going to be so far ahead and so much faster, it just, it won't even compare.
What is the solution for a company like Ford, using that metaphor, to stay relevant, to stay ahead? How can a company how can Fox, for example, compete with Tucker Carlson, to use that analogy?
Listen, I had a chance to live through that in media. And when I fell out of the tech space and decided to go full steam into media, it was before, media companies were still printing magazines. And it was before the birth of real video on the internet. It was before the birth of podcasting and before the birth of mobile, really. And I had so many of these executives tell me that this was never going to work. And I was the young kid in there trying to say, listen, the media is getting ready to just be decentralized into oblivion. Video, podcasts, all of this is going to happen. And I think a lot of those companies had to realize one thing, and that is you almost have to dismantle what you've been doing in the past and start from zero again. And then you're at the same level as the guy with 100,000 subs called David Lin. You're no different. And who brings the best value at that point is going to win. And I think that's the difference in media for the future.
You've looked into this yourself. Do you have an idea as to which platform is going to be dominant in terms of distribution? Is it Twitter? Is it YouTube? Something else? Something independent?
I think I would suggest that your audience check into a project called Lens Protocol. And the reason is because of the concept behind it of when we get into true Web3, digital ID, where there is no more OAuth, authentication for sign in, or you go into a website, a New York Times, and sign in. This would be just something that goes with you on every single place you go on the internet, which will be essentially Web3 enabled. And it will be, whether you're a .eth or a .crypto or a .x or whatever your definition is to connect. I think that we'll see decentralized social media. Obviously, what Nostr is doing is pretty amazing, but it's still riding on a lot of integrations with Lightning. Doesn't necessarily mean we won't see more of that, but Lens Protocol will be the future. And I think that's going to be a big one because it will decentralize all sorts of content in ways. Imagine if you put out a video today. Your workflow right now is you're probably going to edit this. It's going to go out to YouTube. Maybe you're going to take the audio and you'll flip it over to an RSS reader. It'll flip it out to Spotify and iTunes and, a handful of other podcast players. Imagine if that content went into any Web3 enabled app. any Web3 enabled app, Coinbase's app, and they had a player, your content would immediately show up there automatically if you were utilizing a new decentralized approach. So I think that is going to be the thing that breaks the back of traditional media.
Paul, a final question. Given your background with working for the big tech companies, specifically Microsoft, who do you think is going to come out on top in the AI race? I'm talking about specifically the big tech companies. Who do you think will be the leader in providing a ChatGPT equivalent?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Microsoft, Google are, OpenAI, Bard, obviously are the two players with ChatGPT, et cetera. But I think there might be one that has yet been revealed. Because we're in the early days, and it's very possible that whoever does come up with the real winner could most likely be assisted by AI to create the real winner. So what we're seeing today is still humans making AI. When AI starts making AI, then you have a different playing field. And that is something we have not seen in ever in the history of man. So
is that what you want to see? AI making AI?
That is the question mark, as Elon would say. We just don't know where this is going to take us.
I had that. That was supposed to be my last question, but this will be my last question. As an engineer in your past career life, you've looked into this yourself. Is there anything in the tech space that scares you? Any developments that would keep you up at night, or that you would not want to see?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are a little worried about AI. I'm actually not as worried about it right now. I think it's still somewhat infinitesimal in terms of its ability and its current state. Now, could it accelerate? Sure, it could. But I mean, it's like machine learning. That has been in Silicon Valley for 2 decades. Machine learning is still a pretty rudimentary process to get to data. We do this right now with our own sentiment analytic tools. We use machine learning. We have some AI tools that we use within it to analyze sentiment. And it is so wrong so often that it still needs human intervention to analyze the data. You need a data scientist to analyze this stuff constantly. Anytime that you still have to put a human into the mix, the technology is not ready to go to the next level. It's the same thing that Tesla is running right now with FSD. The supercomputer Dojo cannot do a better job than all of those people across the world that are basically tagging all of these data inputs to tell the computer that's a stop sign, that's a cat, that's a child. These kind of things I still think we're a ways out. And, if you follow, I think Elon is probably the one that is closest. It's very possible Tesla, whether you look at Neuralink or many of his companies, SpaceX, et cetera, he's on the right direction, but I still think he's very, very early.
Paul, I'd love to have you back on and talk more tech. There's so much in the tech space that we can talk about. But for now, follow Paul Barron and learn more, and follow his work to stay up to date on the latest tech beats. Where can we follow your work, Paul?
Yeah, just come over to Paul Barron Network on YouTube. You'll find everything we're doing there. You can catch us, Paul Barron TV, on Twitter. It's very easy to find us.
Okay, we'll put the links down below. Final word, any advice for people who want to be independent, who want to start their own podcast, who want to potentially compete with Squawk Box and Fox and down the line?
Well, I think they have to do, exactly what you did, David, and that is they got to take the step. So many people often, because I get a lot of podcasters and people coming to our network a lot to ask, how did you get started? What did you do? Some of the things I said, the first step is you've just got to do it. So many people are worried about a camera or a microphone or these kind of really insignificant issues. It's the content, the research, and the work that you put in that matters. That's why you'll find an audience, and all you need is 1,000 tribe members to do it. I think that will be, and it's not easy to get there. I wouldn't say that, but it is the way to get there. So it's easy enough for most people to understand it.
All right, I agree. Thank you very much for your time today, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great being on the show.
Yeah, we'll speak again soon. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.